and you have access now with you can go to any restaurant and order alcohol to go.
Oh no, you don't. It can be delivered to your door.
It can be delivered to you.
No, trust me, I know.
So what we've done is we've said
we're not doing your inventory, John.
No, I'm just saying, hey, just so you know, Maggie, this podcast is really my personal therapy session 90% of the time. Did I screw that up?
And you can get Listen Up for only $14.99.
Now,
no, it's not 3 years ago. That's not here.
Yeah.
That's you here?
All right, so Jeff, are we going?
We're going.
All right, so I made fun of you on the last podcast with your little video.
Hey, Doogie Howser.
And so I'm willing to take it. This is me in 2014.
How old were you?
Well, I was 44.
Okay.
Dude, you look like I swear, you look like you're a senior in high school.
I think it's really the haircut that makes you
look,
younger.
It
is the haircut.
So you think if I got the same haircut, I'd look younger?
No.
No, because it's gray now.
No, that's not what I'm trying to say. It's just more like not as polished.
It's
like
everything. It's 10 years of Chapel.
Look, I only had one chin.
Chapel World.
y'all are making this very appealing as I enter my first year back in ministry.
We have to do both of us up there. This is like Chapel.
Maggie, just stay here 10 years and you too can look.
No, stay here 3. We're going to do before and after 3. That's what he looked like. This is what he looked like after 3.
So I sent you that picture, Jeff. You can do with it what you want, but I'm just...
I love that. Would you send that to me?
No.
I'm going to frame it.
No, I'm going to frame it.
Well, I wanted to continue. We got with Maggie Wood, who is our worship community pastor at Mercy Street, one of our pastors at Chapelwood. I was just, we talked a lot about Mercy Street in the last podcast and kind of the great ministry and what it does. And I know it's not just Recovery Church. It's never been that. It's always been so much more than that. But you both have both know recovery really well. I mean, you've been through it. You've worked programs. I'm not even going to ask how many starts and stops because it's none of my business.
We can go there.
I was like, I'm honest, so you can ask anything.
You want to go there?
But one of the things now, I always...
I can't be fired now, can I?
You knew what you hired.
Here while I was getting...
the running joke was when I first came to Chapelwood, they said, well, our previous pastor, he was in recovery and he didn't drink alcohol. And I was like, I am not in recovery now, but give me some time. And I might be. I
Still
don't
doing
know.
Field research.
Yeah, so it was just funny the first time we were out somewhere and like somebody saw me drink, they're like, oh, I didn't know the preachers drank alcohol. It's like, oh, they do.
They do.
Oh, they do.
They do.
And as someone is sober and has become a pastor, I'm like, oh no, I've been to those annual conferences. I've seen the after hours.
Oh yeah, if you go to the Texas annual conference and you sit downstairs at the Hilton Americas and the bar, you're like, whew, this is not Baptist. These are not Baptists. No. But I thought I would love, because I was just reading it was interesting to me. I was reading a couple articles. One was in the Washington Post. One was in the New York Times. I read them in the Journal and different papers every morning. But it was interesting to me. We've talked about sadness and loneliness from COVID and depression. Yeah. And I found a couple of articles where alcohol consumption surged not only during the pandemic. That may not be a surprise to people, but alcohol-related deaths have actually surged in a more... I didn't know this. I mean... I do remember when the pandemic was happening and we were on lockdown and we would go out to walk the dog and like everybody was in their homes and it was recycle day and the blue bin would be out by the street. And I'm like, holy moly. Like we put ours out there and it's filled with bottles of wine and we go to the next door neighbors filled with bottle of wine. I mean, every recycle bin is filled with alcohol bottles and wine bottles. Yeah. And it was like, I even sent a video. I was like, here's one. I didn't post it on Facebook because mine was one of them, but I was kind of like sent it to some people. I was like, holy moly. So I get that it's up, but one of the things is like, it's really raised, and there's just a couple of things I thought we could maybe just talk about what your thoughts are. The number of deaths caused by alcohol have skyrocketed nationwide, rising more than 45%. In 2021, alcohol was the primary cause of death for more than 54,000 Americans, causing nearly 17,000 more deaths than just a few years before in 2018. Mississippi saw a 159% increase in alcohol-related deaths. And they even have this graph that shows it by state. But what this one guy who's a National Institute Alcohol Abuse said that the traumas of the pandemic, the fear of COVID-19 infection, job losses, social isolation, added to stresses that were already spurring people to drink. And so what he just said is I've always said the pandemic was like an accelerant of whatever it was that you had going on in your life. We mentioned in the last podcast, you couldn't imagine, like, you went through getting clean and sober before you had kids, but we're in ministry with a lot of people that have children or are trying to go through that. And I would imagine that kids would be one of the major stressors in your life if you have like normal kids like I do. Anyway, I just thought it would be interesting to talk about,
if you have normal kids,
to talk about this in a sense of like, what are the factors? I mean, you all are seeing, and I know you both are in ministry with a lot of people that are wrestling with stressors and struggles, and not as many people come to me on the addiction recovery things. They come to me on the anger management issues. I'm really good on that. I can help with that. But what are you all seeing out there? Does this stuff, the data, kind of resonate with your real experience? Is like you're moving in spaces out there?
Does the data, I don't know if I would say, because I've been immersed in it, I guess I feel like it's very common, right? So for me, I guess the data is like, okay, yeah, that doesn't surprise me, if that makes sense. But what I would also say that I think the data isn't necessarily showing is in the program, when someone, specifically we're talking about alcohol and drugs, there are different types of alcohol users. There are some that would say they're a full-blown alcoholic, that they just had this instinct since they had a first drink and they've just never stopped. Then there are problem drinkers. There are high-functioning alcoholics. There's all different kinds of different people who kind of fit. Some people who never drank their whole life and then all of a sudden at 40 started drinking. So like everybody's story within the recovery world is a little bit different. And so I would say that's harder to kind of pinpoint on the data. But I think what you're saying, that you throw that accelerant, you throw out any of those like opportunities to have social interaction or positive influence, and the thing that people are using is drugs and alcohol to cope with life, and you take away that, again, that social interaction, I think you're going to see, of course, these numbers skyrocket because, again, alcohol and drugs weren't working for them. And you maybe took away, because of the pandemic, you took away some of these positive influences that maybe were preventing people from drinking as much, because everyone's working at home and everyone's doing everything at home. There's less of that
Everyone's
social.
Stuck at home with their kids.
Yes, again.
I keep saying kids are horrible. They're great once they grow up and move out.
Well, it's any of those stressors. It's any, and then you talk about financial stuff. I mean, the pandemic was a huge financial thing. So any of those normal, everyday things that can be stressful, you throw that onto somebody who has an alcohol or drug problem. That's their coping mechanism with life. Then again, if all of that's going up, of course that's going to rise.
One of the stories talks about a couple that they were both comedians, and how sometimes they would partly be paid by drinks at the clubs that they worked and stuff like that, and that when the pandemic hit, they couldn't work at all, and so he was drinking tons, just like grain alcohol every day, until he was shipped to the hospital with his his liver was failing on him or whatever else. I've always referred to myself as a situational alcoholic. Like if the situation demands, I will drink more than I should, and if it doesn't, then I don't. I don't know if that's an actual like really diagnosable term or not.
I don't know.
Just depends on how many situations it demands.
And who's causing these situations?
Once a month.
I can say as just anecdotally myself and our family, it's like we started drinking more pandemic, and I would say probably drink more than before the pandemic. Just I don't know if it became.
But what are you correlating with that?
Habit.
Why do you think that was the case?
Why do I think? Probably because it's factual. No,
I'm just saying, as in, like, are we just saying it's the pandemic, or what happened in the pandemic to cause the drinking to rise?
One of the things that was kind of a running joke to people is 5 o'clock came at noon. Because you're home all day, or you're working from home all day.
Your normal routine is
so you're day drinking, which is not something that you do a lot, right? You don't, a lot. There are some people.
Your Yeti cup. What's in your Yeti cup? You see so many moms and dads.
It's ice water.
Well,
Yeah, how many Zoom meetings where you had like a cup like this? You're like, oh, it's good. Yeah, I see. I hear you. Why don't we go to Joe right now and see what it is?
yeah.
But I'm just wondering, like, yeah, I mean, like I people when COVID first started, it was like camp. It was kind of like fun vacation, and they got old real quick.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know the running jokes were people. It's like, yeah, now we start drinking at noon instead of 5 or 6 or whatever, and so that increases. I think you didn't have as many social restrictions,
restriction barriers to some of those habits.
I also think that we were under an extreme amount of duress and stress and anxiety as a culture.
Yes.
And the reason that addiction works is because it works. Like alcohol, drugs, any of the other addictions that we can talk about are painkillers. And so most people will reach out to something because it satiates a pain in their life.
Self-medication.
Right. And again, I don't think Maggie and I would demonize alcohol at any level in people's lives. When it becomes a problem to medicate something that the actual substance cannot cure is when I think spiritually, socially, relationally, there's an issue. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we saw, and why you see we see isolation. What the Surgeon General says that within America, we're in a place of an epidemic of loneliness. Right, and loneliness, stress, and anxiety are all factors that go into chronic use of alcohol or drugs or other addictions because it becomes a cultural way of numbing the pain in your life.
Numbing, not fixing.
Numbing.
And I think because then we just need more, right? If it's just numbing, that means it's just putting it off a little bit longer. You don't have to feel that anxious presence or the stress from whatever you're dealing with. But then again, after that 2 drinks, the next day, that anxiety and stress is still there if you haven't dealt with it, right? And then you're in the pandemic, it just went, we thought it was 2 weeks. We thought it was 3 weeks. And it just continued on. And then, so what is this new normal, and how am I going to be able to kind of operate in this? And if alcohol was that thing, then yes, it's going to continue to rise.
It's continued. I mean, we're not locked down anymore. We haven't been locked down. I know there's not a lot of limitations for COVID or for anything else, but you still have the stressors. So it's kind of like if your baseline went up, it's like stress didn't go away. I mean, inflation probably made it worse, or the economy, or whatever else it is. I mean, your stress never go away. One of the things it said in this particular article was, I think this one was the Washington Post. Yeah, I think so. But it was talking about how it's the highest level of alcohol consumption since 1988. But it says experts point to a variety of factors for the increase, among them stagnant alcohol taxes that make drinking cheap relative to inflation, increased marketing to women. And that's the New York Times article, is that alcohol deaths and negative factors are they've always affected men more, but the rate at which they're affecting women is rising dramatically.
Absolutely.
And social despairs, crises of mental health, all these sorts of things are happening. The other article is this one, that the rising deaths among women. That was fascinating to me too, because as I was reading the article, it doesn't give you, it can show the data on the numbers, but it says it didn't pinpoint the reasons, but they have some thoughts. Yeah. First, consumption seems to be growing among women. Alcohol hits women differently. They tend to have less fluid to dilute the alcohol compared with men's bodies, which results in higher alcohol blood concentrations, and women are at a higher risk for depression and anxiety. Now, that's according to their study. So I just thought it's definitely an issue, but I'm fascinated to hear from you. Why is it that we go to, I don't think it's that, like shopping can be an addiction to cover up an issue. Eating can become something to try to cover up or mask. Workaholism, there's any number of things. How do you help people who might be questioning if they're masked? How do you help people get to, like, what's the root of causing these things?
Yeah. That's a really great question. I mean, I think some of it for me is that if somebody comes in and I think it's hard to diagnose someone with, some people, but I think being able to, one of the Christian tenets of our faith is fasting, right? And so I'll encourage folks to take a break from whatever that behavior is for 7 days to 10 days, and just begin to observe what their reaction is without that, right? And what cravings come on. What is it? You can do that with sugar.
What
you
thinking.
can do that. What thinking. What dreams they have. What their reaction is in certain social situations or relational dynamics, and just begin to just be an enlightened witness to your own behavior without that substance. And often, because some people will say, I've gone 3 weeks without a drink. I'm not an alcoholic. Well, that's not alcoholism. It's not the amount you drink. It's how you drink, when you drink, and what you're asking that alcohol or drug or behavior to do for you.
Someone could be an alcoholic and not necessarily have to have a drink every day.
Absolutely. It's
that
not
would be
the
me.
amount.
That would be me. I did not have to have drink every single day.
Before you
That's why it was hard for me to stop drinking, because for me, I had periods of time where I was high functioning. I had a job, I had relationships, I had all this, but it was what I thought that alcohol and drugs was going to do for me, that I thought it was going to change the way I felt. I thought it was going to change this anxiety that I could never get rid of, that I just felt like I couldn't operate at times. But there were periods where it was fine.
What, 6 months? I'm fine.
Yeah.
I think it's the relationship. It's the dynamic of the relationship you have with the substance or the addiction that is the thing to notice.
Yep.
Without this, how do I feel? How do I act? How do I behave? What are my reactions? And often the substance or the addiction can then mask that, can numb that, so that you can cope. And I think that's the question then, what Gabor Maté, who wrote a book called In the Presence of Hungry Ghosts, which is a great book on addiction, he says really the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. That what we need is to be deeply connected with each other, with ourselves, and that what addiction does is basically bypass that and impedes that. And so once he would suggest that once folks are in deeply connected relationships, those things are not necessary, and they become an impediment to what you really need, which is deep connection, right? And I think that rings true for me.
I would say, yeah.
That I think is particularly coming out of the pandemic, where we have a higher rate of isolation, higher cultural kind of splitting.
Exactly what you needed to overcome an addiction.
You took it away.
You've taken it away.
Was taken away from you. Connection.
And you have access now you can go to any restaurant and order alcohol to go.
Oh, no, you don't. It can be delivered to your door.
It can be delivered to you.
No, trust me, I know.
So what we've done is we've said
we're not doing your inventory, John.
No, I'm just saying. Hey, just so you know, Maggie, this podcast is really my personal therapy session 90% of the time. That's what this is.
Okay.
This is what it is. So
Okay.
I think that you're right. I mean, you used to never, before the pandemic in Texas, and I think a lot of states are similar, you couldn't buy margaritas and bring them home. Like if you went and picked up at El Tiempo, you couldn't. You'd have to make the margaritas by yourself. Now it's like,
they'll give you the
sell
mix.
it to you.
They'll give you the mix, and then you go buy. Yeah,
but now they sell you the mix
Exactly.
with the tequila, and they're like, it's in a big gallon drum.
Oh yeah,
they'll
on
put it
Uber,
in a styrofoam
DoorDash, you
cup
can
and bring it to your car.
Oh yeah, like you could say, I can't finish this. Can take it to go. It's like, sure. Used to never be able to do that.
Yeah.
Here's a little piece of tape, I think, they put over it and say,
yes,
as if that's gonna
because that's gonna keep the driver while they're driving.
It really
home.
is a different world in that, like, we're babysitting on Saturday, and so I went to pick up some food in the Heights and some pizza and stuff, and I'm thinking, I'm sure they have no good wine at my daughter's house, so I'm like, can I buy some wine? And they're like, sure. How much you want? I'm like, holy moly.
Yeah.
Sure. We'll just let you take it. With you.
Yeah. But I think that the availability of that has increased, but I think that often we haven't thought about like what's my soul hungry for? What's going on with me that, when I take a fasting break from this behavior, this substance, that I get really agitated. I get really angry. I get really, and that I need this in order just to take the edge off, to feel a little better, to cope. Is that this becomes this becomes a numbing, this becomes Novocaine to this internal pain, and that's what I think. In the article that you shared, John, is like spot on. I'm seeing that within folks, the rise of that everywhere. Right. And I think that I think the church has something to offer, not, and like you're saying, Maggie, not in a shameful way, but in a shaming way. There's nothing wrong with these things. We just have to be enlightened witnesses saying, maybe there's more. Like Jesus said, do you want to be made whole?
Life and life abundant, not just live life, not just exist.
Yeah.
But live with some purpose and meaning.
Because I think some people have this idea that, sober people, like, oh, how do you do that? Like, you guys are freak shows. Like, how do you have fun? Or whatever. It's like, God, if I'm going to be...
What do you do when you go to a cocktail party?
Right?
No.
Just my God.
This gets asked all the time.
All the time.
All the time. And I go out all the time. And I also tell my friends who get to know that I don't drink, like, please still invite me. I like the social aspect. I might not stay as long. I might not stay as long as you guys because I'm not
Or I might be driving you home.
Yes, or I'll be the designated driver. That's true. But my point is, like, I think it's important for anybody. I would not have stayed sober. I got sober, first got introduced to rehab at the age of 20, did not stay, got 90 days, not really. Went back out, got some knowledge that I needed to stay away from that drug, but if I were able to do this, I'd be just fine. But then I came back in and stayed sober at 22. And I would not have stayed sober at 22 if you said that all I get to do is just go to church on, Saturdays or Sundays or whatever that is, go to my meetings and go home with my family. No, I go to music concerts, I go out with my friends, I go to brunch, I do all the things that I would have wanted to do actually when I was drinking, but actually with more meaningful connections, with meaningful relationships with people. And I wake up in the morning with energy and not a headache and all those other things that come in with drinking. And I don't spend as much money on any of that stuff. So I can enjoy really good food.
It's not cheap. It's not a cheap, your dinner bill. I'm jealous of your dinner bill. Like my dinner bill is always doubled, from whatever it's going to be, just because of wine, usually.
But I will tell you, like the food and beverage, they are trying to get onto, okay, how can we market like these sober cocktails to appeal? Mocktails. Oh, I know. And they're just expensive. We were just in Hawaii and we went to this really nice restaurant to celebrate our anniversary, and they had this whole mocktail section, and it was maybe $2 cheaper than the actual alcohol cocktails. But we got one just as like a celebratory dinner, and I was just laughing. I was like, why? It's just fruit juice and some simple syrup that has like some rosemary or something in it.
Some
so
lavender infused.
Exactly. But again, it did. I was like, sure. But for some people, they need that because that's so, like to go into a social setting and feel like, oh, people are going to be looking at what I'm drinking. Most of the time, people aren't going to be looking at what you're drinking. They're paying attention to themselves. And so it really is more you getting comfortable in your skin going into those settings. Also
wonder if like the, if the rise of addiction is really a canary in the coal mine, if it's saying something about the very environment that we're living in as a culture, that it's not just about like numbing and novocating ourselves in a sense. It's really saying something that we're living in a culture right now where something's amiss. Where if you have a rise of, folks over 65 that are kind of, which is really the time you think, oh, I get to retire and I get to coast and it's going to be a blast. And that's where we're seeing a rise in addiction. If we see women that are having more fatalities in the rise of addiction and that, we have to say, hang on, time out. Is there something that's occurring within our whole culture that's causing us to what sociologists will call these deaths by despair? What they're calling alcohol-related deaths is not just, it's really deaths by despair is what sociologists are rating these. And so there's a despairing thing in our culture that I think that we have the chance to step back and say what's happening.
So this is a fascinating thing too, and I didn't send it to you in advance, but I've read this as well. Gen Z, which is the younger generation now, They're drinking less than prior generations did. Many Gen Zers are abstaining from booze. They're also less sexually active than previous generations. And one of the hypotheses is that they are connected more closely, an awareness to the risks associated with alcohol, smoking, things like that. Although I think the vaping is still a big thing.
It is still a big thing.
Because they make it taste like cherry donuts or I don't know. But I do think it's interesting because you would think, well, it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. But man, the younger generation is really intersecting with. Now, we're talking about alcohol a lot. Addiction can manifest. And one of the things I think is real is pornography.
Absolutely.
Huge. Because back in the day, it was in your cousin's treehouse. The Playboys were.
John, is there something you need to talk about?
When you get your cousin's house, you had to go and it was under the board.
That was very specific, John.
Again, true confessions of John.
The difference in access versus and then when it came online, it was like you have to pay it and have your credit card on file, and your name gets spilled in Ashley Madison web dump, or but now it's like, and I've talked with some parents who have young teenagers that are addicted to pornography because of the accessibility of it.
Everybody has this. It's a full-on computer that's easily, versus if you had a shared computer back when I was like a teenager, we had a shared computer that was out in the open. But now almost every teenager has one of these in their hands. So less likely your mom's going to necessarily be looking all the time. So
so I mean, the article kind of stuck me on the alcohol, but I think the bigger issue, and you guys are speaking into it, is like there's a variety of things that can become an addiction.
Painkillers.
And primarily it is trying to mask or cover up or deal with some pain that's what intrigues me, is how do we help people get to that. I was talking with somebody with anger management, and it really was about they were wanting what are just 2 or 3 easy methods that when I get angry, I can calm down. I'm like, ooh, there's something deeper going on here that's leading to that or triggering that or where it's coming out of. And that's something we got to get to before we can just say, count to 10 backwards, or whatever.
And
it usually those things, I think anger is another easy coping mechanism. And that's damaging. All these things are damaging because the people that you love and you're closest to end up suffering the most. I've always been intrigued with, is it Al-Anon, where family members
those who have been affected by the disease of alcohol or drugs.
Which is a fantastic program.
It is,
by the way. I remember when Kitty Harris was on the podcast. She has a theory that's been developed, and she's written about, called the process model of addiction, where she says that all addiction, if I'm not incorrect in this, that all addiction really is around pain, is attempting to deal with personal pain. Is there's some indigent, there's some pain that a person is attempting to figure out how to deal with. And so that then the alcohol, the pornography, the food, the shopping, the drugs, whatever that is, that becomes something that you do to figure out how to deal with the pain, then becomes something that you can't stop and actually creates more pain. Right? And so it's not actually dealing with the pain. Then you become dependent on the response that you're using to deal with that pain, and you can't quit dealing with that. But all of that has to deal with the pain in a person's life and how we get to that and deal with that and love that. And
I think if we're talking about the role of the church, if we're talking about all of these as a problem of connecting with others, connecting with ourselves, or even talk about connecting with God, what is the church? How do we intersect where people are having all of these different distortions of, I feel like I need this to be able to connect or whatever, and realize that's a mirage. That's not actually working for you. That anger is not working for you. That porn addiction's not working for you. That alcohol, that drug, whatever that isn't working for you. But is the church a place that we can actually talk about it?
That's really great, because often the church comes in and says, your problem is is your alcoholism. Your problem is your porn. And I think that becomes a smoke screen rather than the church say, okay, I see
moralism.
that.
It's kind of dealing with the surface sins.
Yep. That's why I think you have so many churches, so many denominations that we've even talked about and seen in our own lives. We have this, like, the iceberg underneath it. All these folks, all these pastors, all these priests, all these, all this stuff comes out at the end because it's almost like it's a powder keg or a pressure cooker. They're trying to keep it all down rather than saying the issue is not this, as if you can just sublimate, quit this. Actually the issue is pain.
I'm sorry, and I probably shouldn't even say. It's just amazing to me how many people, man, they draw the line in the sand. Homosexuality is a sin. The church, you got to buckle down on it. And I'm telling John, I'm going to tell you, and this person's been divorced 3 times.
Yeah.
And,
or dealing with addiction in their own family.
And I'm just like, okay. But it's like, again, there's different layers of like what we manifestly like look out and say, this is the real issue. Right. That's why people are so angry
all the time.
And just in the culture.
Yeah.
And it's like our own stuff. We just don't want to be honest about our own stuff.
Well, the human experience is hard. It's really difficult. Not everybody has been given the tools. Well, most people have not been given the tools with how to deal with what happens in life. And if the church can't be a real place to be able to talk about how this is just the tool I had, this is what I had, like this is what was given to me, this is what I thought. And then how do we unpack that? Like, well, was that actually working for you? Is that bringing about what you wanted in your life, right? And so that's what I would say is more for us to all talk about versus saying they're doing it right and they're doing it wrong. Most of us are doing it wrong. We have to admit that. Jesus came here to begin with because we weren't doing it right. And versus saying us versus them, or that's okay versus that's not okay. And how do we engage a culture who's not engaging necessarily the church anymore, but how do we engage them and say, okay, I see that you're using this thing right now to try to make sense of this world, to stop this pain that you feel. What does it look like for us to stand alongside them in their pain instead of judging it, but coming alongside and trying to understand it? And maybe some healing can really happen. It might not be me that does it, but I'm walking alongside them as we find healing for that thing that they're going to, alcohol, drugs, whatever, name it.
It's interesting. I think social media can be addictive. I think now like politics for some people has become an addiction. It's like their whole
religion.
It's that connection. I want to feel like I belong to something. If I identify to this one group of people, then maybe I belong, right? I matter. I mean, this means something to me.
There is a lot of research and stuff that's been done around that. The tribalism that exists in our culture is that, we talked about this recently, is that if people don't feel seen, they feel like they don't matter. That's kind of an injustice. I think it was Russell Moore talked about this, but I don't remember off the top of my head. It is an injustice not to be seen. And so what happens is they align themselves with these movements, right? Because that becomes their identity. This is who I am. And they get lost in it. You don't really know who you are. You just know you're that. And so everybody that's not that on your team is the enemy. So it defines enemies for you. It defines friends for you. I think all that stuff at a deep level is kind of where we are as a society and a culture. And I think, we for a long time understood alcohol is an addiction, pornography is an addiction, overeating is addiction, shopping is addiction. But there's other things now with social media and politics and all these things that they have sort of the same masking effect of not allowing us, or maybe we're not willing to kind of be honest about how we do feel disconnected and don't feel that we matter. I mean, you see these things, and I know we're kind of rambling now, but I mean, you see these stories of this heinous shooting in Jacksonville, right? Where this guy has written all this, stuff against black folks, and African American. He wanted to kill black people. He went to the college campus and was turned away, and then went to the Dollar General. And when they said he's 20 years old, I'm like, this kid, I mean, I don't want to say groomed or used. Some of those words are loaded. I mean, where did he get this? I mean, you know what I'm saying? You talk about nature versus nurture. I mean, this was nurtured in him through whatever he was connected to on social media, whether his upbringing, all these sorts of things. And it's like, he's so mad at the world. He's so whatever, fill in the blank, that he would commit this unspeakable act and think in some ways this is a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something that's like,
that's right.
The 3 of us, 4 of us, I'm including you, Jeff. I mean, it's something probably we can't even relate to. I mean, I don't even know what.
Well, it's to that nth degree, but that's the harder thing. That seems so hard for us to understand, and yet that is a child of God who somehow got it so distorted that they thought that action, that thing was going to bring them that sense of belonging. You know what I'm saying? That one seems so hard for us. And so that's my point is we all humans draw the line at some point. We're like, well, that's a little too hard. Yet someone has to be able to say, what made this person think that was okay?
Well, in the program, we call that insanity.
Yes.
Right? We call that actually, I'm doing this thinking this is a sane thing. And I've created a context where me getting totally loaded is the best choice for me. Me going into the internet and disappearing for hours is the best choice for me until I can't make the choice anymore, right? The choice is made by me. And so I'm being used, my lifeblood is being used by the addiction. And I think that's why when we see guys like this or things like, it's insane. But I also, as a recovering addict, know, oh yeah, I can understand, I can create a world to where this choice only makes sense in this context. And it can be the only world I live in. I think that's where the church, 12 Steps, communities say, actually, your deepest need is for connection. It's not to believe. It's not to confess Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior, and then you get the Pez dispensing power to release you from all addiction. That's not true. It's that you need to be connected to someone else that constitutes a real relationship where you can become vulnerable. And Jesus says, that's actually where the 2 or 3 are gathered in my name. That's where I am. And I think that's what people are hungry for. And if the church offered that, not just said, don't do that, but said, wait, we all do these things. Why don't we get to a place where we can be vulnerable, understand that, and then let's walk along side each other as we try to walk each other home towards those things.
And maybe let go of those things that were never working for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right. It's, we have to close this down, but it was like Peter Senge talks about that we all need ruthlessly compassionate truth tellers in our life. And I shared this on Sunday in this morning.
That's what I was about to say. Accountability. Hate it, but love it.
It's one of the hardest things in the world and one of the most transforming things in the world is because I talked about introspection illusion. Is we don't have the capability of privileged access to see ourselves honestly.
Yes.
And this is like psychologically borne out.
Yes.
This professor from Princeton and all this research has been done. We don't see ourselves honestly. Yeah. We have a bias. And anytime we say, oh, well, I don't, then we're even more guilty than we think. And to have people that, the hardest thing in the world and yet the most liberating and transforming is for someone who really loves you, they love you and is honest with you and holds the mirror up and shares something with you that, man, pricks you, sticks you, kind of really almost makes you want to fight. And yet, that person loves you. And that's what Senge says, that's the only thing that can break the flow, break the dam for us to really be able to change. And
is what? Another person?
Is ruthlessly compassionate truth tellers walking alongside of us.
Yes.
Outside of that, we will not change, even if we know we need to change.
Yes.
And so whether it's a friend or a brother or a sister or a sponsor or whatever, that gets you to release it so that the change can happen.
I think also the key of what you just said is walking alongside you.
Yes.
It's not shouting from a corner, hey, stop what you're doing, and I have no relationship with that person, right? It's walking alongside. There's some skin in the game because you're actually doing this life together. You actually care about me.
I always say, so if you break that down, ruthlessly compassionate, ruthless truth-telling. Some of us are really good at ruthless truth-telling. We're not very compassionate. I know a lot of religious people that are great at telling the truth. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. You got to tell the truth, and that's how you love people, dadgummit.
Yes.
I love you. I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to break your spirit because of love. Out of love, I'm going to beat beat you out of love. It's like,
Jesus loves you and you're going to hell.
But I'm just saying that's sort of like a religious mentality, a churchy mentality of truth supersedes the compassion. The truth is more important than the love. And what Singy says is no, they both have to be there. And so some of us are good at truth telling, but we're not good at compassion. Some of us are wired to be really good at compassion, but we don't tell the truth to other people. We can't be honest with other people. So, I mean, sometimes, and that's the hard thing to do. I always use the stupid analogy, like when, someone cooks you dinner and your wife cooks you the first dinner after you married, or you cook the dinner or whatever, and she goes, oh, it's really good. Because she loves you so much, but it's horrible. You tried, but it's horrible. And sometimes people say, I wouldn't even feed this to my dog. It's truthful. It's not very loving and compassionate. I think the only time that works when you talk about walking alongside, but also when someone cares about you. Yes. And that's the thing when like preachers and religious folk and churches and denominations say these things to certain groups of people. They're like, I know you don't love me. You say you love because you're supposed to. You don't love me.
Yeah.
I know you don't love me.
Yeah.
And they don't love you.
Yeah.
And so you can speak all the truth you want. It's not gonna change anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the same way, sometimes we love and enable. Now we get into like enabling our children because we can't be honest that they actually might be the ones that put themselves in this mess. No, not my child. My child would never do anything wrong. I mean, it's and I think that's the deep inner work that we have to go through in life. And that's why I love Chapel. We talk about one of the things is coming together, and we kind of thought that was going to be one of our, what we call it, bylines or whatever, coming out of the pandemic, because we're coming back together. Yeah. But it was really about, we want to be a church that's about community.
Yes.
Not just you come to church and you learn. We want to be a church that walks alongside. Because that's where transformation happens.
Yes. It lives life, not just in the 1 hour that we meet together for worship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we have solved, I think, 90% of the world's problems, Jeff, in this episode, maybe. I'm not sure.
That's it.
There's 10% more to do. We'll have to come back another time.
Get the next 10% next week.
Hey, make sure if you like the episode, or if you don't like the episode, but you like the podcast, even if you don't like the podcast, make sure you like it. Make sure you subscribe. It really does help. And send it to a friend. One of the things I keep finding, like when we have conversations like this, there are always people who will write or say, someone I love is going through something or whatever. Sometimes it's a good, loving way to let somebody just overhear a conversation that people are having instead of getting preached to.
Yeah.
Yep.
And maybe hearing it in a different way.
Yeah.
That might be helpful for them. I don't know.
I think so.
Anything else, Jeff?
It's great.
All right.
Great.
Well, let's go back and do whatever it was we were doing before we came here.
I want to push this.
I know she's
away.
not to it. Like, I don't want this in my face. All right. Well, we can be done with it now. I'm John Stevens.
I'm Maggie Wood.
And I'm Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.
I thought we were done. I didn't know we were still rolling.
Oh, we're never done when Jeff's recording.
Always
you
rolling.
never know.
Jeff has so much stuff on
the outtakes. Yeah, the outtakes are really...